So you want to get outside, explore the great outdoors. You want to fish, you want to hunt, you want to bike, you want to snowshoe, you want to kayak, you want to boat, you want to go snowmobiling or get an ATV. But there's time and there's money, and very few of us have an unlimited supply of either one. So, what do? I don't have the answers, but tonight's episode, I want to talk a little bit about how I go about planning out my outdoor adventures given time and money constraints. So grab a towel, get ready to throw some steam. This is the Saturday Sauna Night podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Saturday Sauna Night podcast. I'm Steve. Tonight I want to talk and think through getting outside and doing all these different hobbies. Often is really time consuming, and depending on what they are, can be kind of expensive. And as I said in the intro, I don't have the answers to figuring this out. I'm learning as I go. But I think I've gotten a little better at planning and thinking through, how I'm spending my time and how I'm spending my money on these different hobbies. And so I'm specifically going to be thinking a lot about fishing, biking quite a bit, with a little bit about hunting, quite a bit about camping. That one's a little different because that's something that we do as a family. And then some other, I guess lower investment things like snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, and a little bit about things I used to really love doing that I still would probably do if I had an unlimited supply of time and money. Specifically, snowmobiling is the one that comes to mind. So I'm going to start off with fishing because that's on my mind a lot. This kind of started as a joke, but I was trying to figure out where to go ice fishing this weekend. And so I have plans to go out tomorrow. And, I haven't been out in, I don't know, at least a few weeks. It feels like longer. And so I was trying to think through, okay, here's all these different places I could go. Here's some new lakes I've never been to before. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And just to be funny, I made this spreadsheet on Google Sheets with the different lakes I was interested in fishing, species that were in those lakes, and this was mostly trout because that's mostly what I target. And I put all these different categories like driving time, how much time and effort does it take to actually access the lake once you park the truck? Because not all of these lakes that you can ice fish, sometimes the road in isn't plowed or the boat launch isn't plowed. So, it's not always practical to drive right up to the shore. I considered, have I been fishing there before? How has the fishing been? Have I had some success? Have I caught some decent fish? Has it been hit and miss? I considered, another thing that's important to me when I go out, specifically fishing, but other things too, is I want to be in when I'm fishing, I want to be in a wilderness area. I don't really love fishing in a city or like in industrial areas. And so if I can find a lake or pond or stream, obviously not in the winter time, well, maybe some people fish rivers in the winter, but if I can find a body of water that is, surrounded on all sides by just trees, and the whole shoreline isn't full of people's camps and summer homes and regular homes, that is meaningful to me. And then I also considered, do I have cell phone coverage there? Can I can can I update Sarah and like when I'm going to be coming home and stuff like that. So again, I did this just because kind of a hilarious joke. At least I thought it was hilarious, but it actually became a little more real because I started thinking about it, and so I made up my mind on where to go. And I originally wasn't going to go there because it is kind of a long drive, but it ranked pretty high in all the other categories. Pretty easy access. I've done pretty well fishing there. As far as like the aesthetic value of the place, beautiful wilderness lake. And so it was just kind of funny to do that. And I didn't actually like weight categories and get too technical with it because it was a joke, but it got me thinking, like, when you're planning out your weekends or your free time, you want to get the most bang for your buck. And for me right now, the last few years, having little kids, time has kind of been the big thing, even more so than money. And so fishing, you can spend as much money as you want on fishing gear, and especially ice fishing. You can put thousands of dollars into an insulated, flip up ice shanty and electric augers and all kinds of things, fancy electronics. But really, to get out and ice fish for trout, like I like to do, you don't really need any of that. I would say you don't even really need electronics most of the time. It is helpful. I use mine just mostly as a depth finder. Very few times have I ever actually graphed a trout and then caught it. There have been a couple times. Never for brook trout though. There were a couple brown trout I caught. And I actually saw them on the bottom, come up, go down. Thought they were perch or bluegill or something. And then a couple of rainbow trout I caught too. Didn't even know they were hooked until I saw this weird line on my graph. And then I feel like my jig's not on the bottom anymore. Like, what the heck? So I would say most of the time you don't even need electronics. Tomorrow when I go out, I'm going to be taking I have a jet sled. It's just basically a little sled that you can pack gear in. A 5-gallon pail with a couple rods, a tip up, my jaw jacker. But I mean, that stuff's all pretty inexpensive. I don't think I've ever spent more than like $15 on an ice fishing rod. Then there certainly are companies and manufacturers that make, really great products that you can put more money into. But for the kind of fishing I do, I'm happy with what I got, and I'm okay with using cheaper stuff. I think the most expensive thing I bought, would have been my graph, but I bought that used. I found someone on Craigslist selling it, and it actually has been a really good investment because I think I only paid maybe $130 for it. And it has a transducer that you can attach for ice, and it also has one that attaches with a suction cup to put on a boat. And so, if you have a bigger boat that you're using, for walleye or bass fishing or whatever, it's probably not an ideal setup. But for me, fishing out of a kayak or a canoe, it works perfect. I can use it all summer, and I can switch out the transducer and use it all winter long. So pretty simple setup. So with ice fishing especially, even more so than fishing in the open water season, time is a huge concern. Time is very, very limited especially during the winter, because there's a few things. The first thing is I'm extremely lucky to have summers off because I'm a teacher. And so most professions don't have that. A lot of people will take maybe, a week-long vacation in the summer or however much time they have. But as long as I've been teaching, I've had those summers mostly free. I don't literally do nothing. I've done other things. I've I've done some summer school and other, different conferences and, stay busy, but it does give me a lot of time to explore and to keep free for doing these things I love to do. The other thing with summer, especially in these northern latitudes like we have here in the UP, is the days are long. The sun is up at, between 5:30 and 6 a.m. and it's light until almost 11 o'clock at night. So even though the summer season is short, when you're in that time frame, you have a little more time to work with. When I go fishing in the summer, the other thing is for trout, there's a whole bunch more places open to fish during the summer. Basically anything that has fish in it is open to fishing in the summer unless it's in some special, research area or something. And so I have a couple of favorite lakes and streams I fish in the summer that are relatively close to home, and I can go there. I can leave home at 5 a.m. and be on the water before 6 and be done and like pulling into the driveway just as the rest of the family's waking up in the summer. And so that's great, and I've had a lot of success on the water doing it like that. I get to watch a lot of sunrises, and so that's great. In the winter, though, it's a little trickier because the days are short. The sun isn't coming up until 8, around 8 a.m., and it's getting dark. Now it's getting a little lighter as we're moving into February here. It's light until a little bit after 6 o'clock now at night, and the nice thing about this season is we're adding light now instead of subtracting. But it's tricky because you want to get on the water for sunrise, it's a lot later in the morning. And the other thing is I'm working full time. So I don't, I can't just go out on a random weekday when there would be fewer people out and about and fish or, go for a bike ride or whatever. So like so many people, I'm kind of a weekend warrior and I have to pick and choose. And I don't, have every weekend free to go do stuff because, Sarah might be working a weekend. And that brings up a whole other thing, which I kind of wanted to do a separate episode on, but like involving your kids in the outdoors. And I guess I don't want to get into that now because I think that there's a lot to say about that. That could probably be, its own episode. But I guess the point is right now during the wintertime, time outside is precious. And even though the winter season is long and it feels like it goes on forever sometimes, the time where I can actually get outside and utilize it is more limited than during the summer. So, all that to say, I really have to weigh out carefully, when I'm going ice fishing, what I want to, if I only have a few hours on a Saturday or Sunday, I want to get the most out of it. And so whether that is just going to a really beautiful wilderness lake and hanging out, where I don't really even care if I catch a fish, or whether it's going to a place where I've been really successful and caught a big fish or a lot of fish, those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. But when I got into this early, but approaching fishing as a hobby in general, it's pretty easy to do on a budget. Probably even more so than all the rest of the things I have on my list here. You can go to your local Walmart and pick up certainly an ice fishing rod combo, for under $20. But there's a lot of spinning reel combos you can get, for open water. Probably not a whole lot more than that. I think the most I've ever spent on a rod for open water, oh gosh, it was maybe 20 or $25 just for the rod, so it didn't include the reel. So not a lot. And I know, some people like their St. Croix and their, oh, what's that other one? I'm trying to think of that guy's name. Very expensive high-end boutique rods. Um, and again, that's great if you have the money, and sometimes having a more expensive thing just gives you that little bit extra confidence too. I used to play a lot of golf, and it's definitely true with golf clubs or golf balls, or sometimes even how you're dressed. Um, but trout fishing is not an expensive thing to get into. Um, so for what I like to do, my favorite way to fish for trout is, the last few years at least, has been on these small lakes that are managed for mostly for brook trout. And so I have a kayak. It's not a very expensive kayak. I think it was under $200. And of course, I'm going to use my kayak for more than just fishing. Like, we might take them out as a family and go paddling while we're out at the campground or something. So, but again, if you have the money, you can certainly put a lot of money into different float tube setups, or fishing, kayaks specifically built for fishing with, built-in rod holders and a place to mount your electronics and bump boards. You can get those pedal kayaks where you're actually pedaling it through the water. Those get pretty pricey, but yeah, I think my whole setup on any given day in the summer when I'm going to go out and kayak fish on a lake for trout, the whole setup, electronics, kayak, rods, the lures and stuff I'm using, I don't know. I probably am rolling with like a sub $500 setup, or even less than that probably. And you can do it for a whole lot less than that. Now, fishing the brook trout or rainbow or trout lakes in general, most of them are not very approachable to fish from shore. A lot of them have really steep shorelines where you're just gonna have a really hard time standing there. Some that have a more open launch area, or almost a beach area, you're gonna have a hard time casting out past the a lot of the weeds and lily pads and stuff. So definitely helps to have a boat or a kayak or canoe if you're gonna do that. But then there's stream fishing, so that's probably the cheapest way to trout fish. Now, I kind of have overkill for my waders. I have chest waders that come up to here and are insulated, and you do need those if you're going to be out on rivers and streams in more extreme conditions. I've definitely been out in the fall and spring in those when even when it's been snowing, and it's nice to have something that's going to keep you warm and dry. But if you just want to go out in the summertime and stream fish, basically all you need is if you know of rivers that have nice open areas and you can fly cast, absolutely. But otherwise, it's probably even easier just to have a little spinning rod, nice, maybe a 5 foot or even less. Ultralight is nice. And then just spend time looking at maps, figure out where the public land is. I've fished a number of rivers that I enjoy, and I try to get to at least once a season in waders, wading up the river, and I've fished those same ones from the bank. along state land or, national forest land or whatever it is. And a lot of the times I prefer just to be up on the bank because, I don't know, it depends on the river. Sometimes navigating through deep holes and over log jams and stuff gets a little tricky. But, and I know that's how a lot of people who trout fish grew up doing it. And still, I think, is a great way. And at least a few times a season, even though I prefer to fish in the kayak, I still like to get out and be on a little trout stream out in the middle of nowhere. And that's definitely one of the most rewarding parts of fishing, is that sort of exploration and wilderness immersion. Absolutely. Let's talk biking a little bit. So right now we're in the middle of winter and it's fat tire bike season. So that sport has kind of really exploded, and I don't even know what the timeline on it is. The last decade, maybe. I had never really paid close attention until I started doing it a couple of years ago. But all across the northern U.S., I know it's pretty big in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. The UP has become a hot spot for it. But fat tire biking, both on, you'll see people ride roads, like plowed roads, sometimes unplowed roads. Sometimes, depending on the state or the area, you might be able to actually ride on the snowmobile trail. But the big thing is groomed fat tire bike trails. And so we're really lucky because we have a couple of trail organizations that really put a whole lot of time and effort and money into maintaining a really beautiful trail system all winter long. And so a few episodes ago, I think it was episode 12, I talked with Danny Hill from RAMBA, Range Area Mountain Bike Association, based out of Ishpeming, Negaunee. And they maintain, I think he said, they're up to about 30 miles of, it has to be about 30 miles of groomed fat tire bike trail, because that's about how long the Polar Roll was last winter and is advertised as being this winter. And the whole thing last year and this year takes place on the Ramba system. There's also, of course, the NTN, the Nakamenon trails in the Marquette area that have, I don't know how many miles total of groomed fat tire bike trail they have. Fat tire bikes are a little trickier to figure out, I think, for me at least, than mountain bikes, because there's fewer companies that build them, and they can get really expensive really fast. So my first time riding a fat tire bike, I actually rented one from a local bike shop. And of course, most of the bike shops carry these high-end carbon, super lightweight, all the components are just like top of the line bikes. And so my first experience on a fat tire bike was one of those. And of course, when I went and bought my own, I did not have that kind of budget. That would have been like a $5,000 or $6,000 bike. And maybe someday that'd be awesome, but I was looking to spend not the least amount possible, because actually I almost forget about this, but like 4 or 5 years ago, I bought a Mongoose fat tire bike, and I rode it around mostly in the summer on the sand, and the thing was just heavy, and never actually rode it in the snow. We were still living down in Manistee at the time, and there's no fat tire bike trails down there, and I didn't really know enough to where to take it, where I could ride like forest roads and stuff like that. So I had it for a while, got rid of it. And then 2 years ago, I bought my first fat tire. And I think I spent, just about $900 on the thing, brand new out the door. And I still have it, actually. I bought a different bike this past fall because I actually wanted to get a little bit bigger frame. My original bike, and as far as what brand it was and stuff, it's not even really worth saying because there's a whole bunch of cheaper fat tire bike brands that kind of all, I believe they're kind of all built by the same company, just under different names. I could be wrong on that, but I think mine is a Gravity Bullseye. I don't know. It's got 26-inch wheels, which is kind of the standard for a fat tire bike. 26 by 4 inches wide. 4 is also kind of a standard unless you get to the really high end bikes. They tend to have wider tires because they weigh less, and so you can ride with a lot lower pressure on those. But the thing's aluminum. It's not light, but it's not built like a brick either. And I rode the heck out of that thing. Like I said, still have it. It got me through the Polaroll EX in 2021, which was really the first winter I started doing the fat tire bike thing for real. It got me through, took it on a couple of really long rides during the summer and fall, during the dirt season. Combination of ATV trails, sand, gravel roads, stuff like that. And then did Polaroll with it last winter as well, 2022. So, but this past fall I picked up a used Framed. So Framed is a great, I think most people would call it a budget brand for fat tire bikes. And I think they make other mountain bikes and stuff too. But I was familiar with them. I had seen some of their fat tire bikes being advertised or being sold, and so I saw this one come up, and it's called a Minnesota. So it's an aluminum frame. It really wasn't a step up, I don't think, in terms of components from what I had been riding before. But like I said, I needed a bigger frame size for the long rides. The one I had been on felt a little cramped, so I went up to a size large frame instead of a medium. And yeah, I do like the way the bike feels a lot better. But it's not super light either. It's aluminum, and it's got big honking wide tires on it. They're not, it's hard to make those things light without using those super expensive components. But so far I really like the thing. Had it out on quite a few rides now, and have Polaroll coming up in 2 weeks. So that's that. But you can get into fat tire biking for reasonably cheap, especially if you're willing to buy used. If you just walk into a bike shop and say, give me a fat tire bike, you're probably going to be spending, a few $1,000s. But, if you look Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, whatever, if you have, some bike shops do have used inventory. Sometimes they sell their rentals too at the end of the season, which is a nice option. But you can get into it for between $500 and $1,000, which is kind of a lot. So it doesn't hurt to go rent one a couple times. And here around Marquette County, there's a few different options for that. So most of the local bike shops do rent them. They have a rental fleet that you can rent, and I think they're usually something about maybe $30 a day, or maybe a little more, might be closer to $50. And most places will rent you for a half day because you're probably not going to be out biking for 8 hours unless you're renting it to do a race. And actually, the NTN trails in Marquette, I think they're Forestville trailhead. I think they rent bikes there. If you happen to be an NMU student, I believe that they have some sort of rental system too, where they have a fleet of fat tire bikes that you can rent actually for free. And I believe that's run through the PEEF. So that's a cool option if you're a student, or maybe faculty. I'm not sure how that works. But if you want to give it a try, that's a great option to rent. Otherwise, yeah, probably $500 to $1,000 to get started. The other thing is time. So if you live around Marquette County and you're not, way out in the boondocks, then you have a lot of options. You have a lot of options for riding. And I know Munising has a network of trails. Copper Harbor, of course. And I think, I'm sure Houghton and Hancock have a system. Calumet too. I just don't know much about it. I've biked on the Michigan Tech trails in the dirt season, but I've never been up there in the winter to fat tire bike. I know there are trail systems though. I'm just not as familiar with them. Most of the bigger towns around the UP are going to have fat tire bike systems at this point that they grew them. I know Dickinson County, so down by Norway, Iron Mountain, they have a system, I think, that they've been grooming some stuff. So it's becoming more and more popular, and you see more and more trail networks and communities starting to really latch onto it as a big winter sport. As far as mountain biking, just like the fat tire bike, it depends what you're able and willing to spend. So, I other than riding like Huffies and stuff growing up as a kid, I didn't really do anything serious with mountain biking until later. And so I think I was like 24, and my parents actually bought a set of mountain bikes, and they bought one for me and my siblings too. And so it was this giant hardtail, and man, did I ride that thing. That's the bike that really got me into mountain biking, and especially single track stuff. So when I got the thing, I was living in Wisconsin. We actually had some local trail systems that I took it out on a few times, and didn't do a whole lot with it then for a while until moving back up to the Marquette area. And then really, I think I don't think I'm that skilled of a mountain biker. There's technical sections and stuff that I always walk. There's just no way I'm going to ride them. But I think that's the bike that I really learned how to navigate a mountain bike trail on, and especially the rugged, rocky, rooted systems we have. Looking at you, Ramba. So that was a great bike. And I don't know what they spent on it, but I think you could get into one of those for around, well, that was like 7 or 8 years ago. So it was like $500 back then. But I think that same model, it's one of the Talon models that Giant makes. I want to say they're in the neighborhood of $600 to $700 now. And there's like different levels of them, and you can spend more and get like the same model but with higher end components and stuff. But that was great. And actually the hardtail was good for like, I don't know, 75% of the stuff. There really are some trails that if you want to ride them, it really helps to have that air suspension. And so 2 years ago now, losing track of time. Fall of 2021, I picked up my first full suspension mountain bike, and yeah, it's the most I've ever spent on a bike. It was just over $1,000. And that's the one I've been riding now for the last 2 years, and I love it. It's a Diamondback, which usually isn't a brand you hear a lot about as being, making like higher end bikes, but they do make some really nice bikes. And at the time, there was a bike shortage, and this is true for when I bought my fat tire bike too. Like, no one had bikes in stock, and I wanted to ride, so I decided to go for it, and it's been a good bike. I did put on narrower set of handlebars. The ones that came on it were just a little too wide for my taste, but so biking, as far as budgeting your time and money, you can spend as much as you want or as little as you want. And as far as time goes, if you're fortunate enough to live near a trail system, that's amazing. And if not, you got to get a little bit creative. If you want to ride, you don't want to ride through city streets, find, get on Google Maps, or even better, I like the Onyx Hunt maps because they show you very clearly public and private land, and different access points and routes and features and things. But find some back roads to ride, find some a lot of cities and areas have multi-use, like gravel pathways. Of course, the big one around Marquette County is the Iron Ore Heritage Trail. So you can take that thing all the way from, just past Harvey, all the way to Republic. And it spans like 48 miles, an old rail trail, which is pretty cool because there's a whole lot of history along the route too. The other cool thing is that it links into the mountain bike trail systems in the area too. So yeah, budgeting your time and money can be a budget friendly sport to get into. And also, one thing I like about it too is in the future I think it'll become more of a family sport, as the kids get older and learn how to ride two-wheeled bikes and stuff like that. Couple of easy ones to get into that don't really require much of an investment in time or money are snowshoeing. That's actually been kind of surprising how much I've enjoyed that. I never really thought I'd be that interested in it, and I don't go as much as I'd like, but snowshoes, you can get a pair for under $50. I actually just bought a new pair because I accidentally ran over my old ones with the snowblower last winter, and that made a very big project where I had to disassemble the airings and take the auger out and pull out the twisted pieces of metal. And those were really nice snowshoes, and I felt kind of sad that that happened, but I wanted to get a new pair and I didn't want to spend a lot of money. So I hopped on Amazon, and look, full disclosure, I would love to tell you that I shop local all the time, but I don't, because that's part of the budget thing. Now for little stuff, most local stores, it's not going to be that big of a difference, but when you're looking to spend less than $50 on a pair of snowshoes, you almost have to go to Amazon or something. And there's quite a few options, and kind of hard to tell, customer reviews and whatever, but found a pair that looked decent. I think I spent $35 or $40, and I've had them out a few times, and they're just fine. There's nothing particularly remarkable about them, but They're pretty similar to what I had before, and I know the ones I had before were more expensive than that. So snowshoes, pretty easy thing to do. Um, if you've never been out, there's a little bit of a learning curve from just hiking in a pair of boots. You do have to walk with a little bit wider gait, and you know, um, you might feel some hip muscles that you didn't know were there. But if you do it enough, it really just becomes second nature and is a great way to get out and hike during the winter. And again, we have so many trails around the Marquette area. It's ridiculous. I have my favorites that are super close to home, but if you're more adventurous, there's you can snowshoe up Hogback Mountain if you want. Um, you can snowshoe all of the all of the trail systems that are groomed for fat tire biking. They love snowshoers, and you can go back to episode 12 and listen to Danny Hill talk about this. Snowshoeing is really great for the trails because after they've groomed, the trail is pretty soft, and that top layer of snow is pretty loose and needs time to kind of harden up. And snowshoeing really helps pack that. And so after a fresh groom, they really love when snowshoers go out and snowshoe and pack that trail down because it just makes it nicer to bike on. And so you have all of those trails, and a lot of those are a little bit more technical. You'll get to go through, and explore some ridges around these big hills, and really some neat scenery to be had. So highly recommend snowshoeing. Super cheap to get into, and if you live in the UP, super easy to find a place to do it too. One thing, if you're not familiar with snowshoes, don't expect to just go out into a field full of snow, powder, and just like walk on top of the snow. That's not quite how they work. Um, I would recommend a groomed trail or a back road that maybe hasn't been plowed in a while, or it's nice to have a little bit of a cushion. They are nice on ice too, though, because they have metal picks on the bottom that'll kind of dig in, and so I do wear mine ice fishing sometimes, especially if it's a little bit longer hike into the lake. But really nice to have, really cheap to get into. Great thing for the whole family to do too, so highly recommend it. Cross country skiing, similar, probably a little bit more expensive to get into. I actually have the same skis that I got in high school, and I have them. I haven't been out this winter yet, but if you want to snowshoe but faster, it's a good option. There's some really beautiful cross country ski systems around the Marquette County area, specifically groomed for cross country skiing. Most of those systems, I think you can snowshoe, especially if you stay off to the side of the trail a little bit more. But most of the systems around here they'll groom a set of classic tracks, so like the two side-by-side tracks in the snow that you can follow and just go back and forth like you're on a Nordic track, or they'll groom just kind of a lane with just kind of like the corduroy pattern from the groomer, but where you can skate ski. And so those are usually pretty specific to cross-country skiers, but again, especially if you're willing to buy used, you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I guess I don't know how much mine were because they were a gift when I was in high school, but I'm sure you can find used cross-country skis for well under $100. Again, great family option too. Pretty easy to find a place to ski and snowshoe if you're in the UP. Downhill skiing is a different animal, and I'm not going to talk about it because it's not something I've really done aside from a handful of times, and I've always rented equipment. So that does get into some big money and some bigger time commitments too. Let's talk hunting for a minute. So I've talked about this on the podcast before, especially it's come up when Kyle's been on. We talked bird hunting. It's come up when Chris was on and we talked deer season stuff. But I didn't hunt until I was an adult, and I've only been out now, I think, was this past season my sixth year? Fifth or sixth year. So not a whole lot of time. But again, it's one of those things, kind of like the fishing. So you can definitely do it with very minimal equipment. And pretty minimal amount of money too, especially if you're, if you know someone who's willing to let you borrow a bow or gun. You can spend a whole lot of money on it. You can get trail cams that will send you pictures every time something comes by. You can buy these data plans specifically for these trail cams to sit out there in the woods while you're at work or whatever, and a buck walks by, it'll send you a picture to your phone. Pretty cool, but also kind of expensive. You can buy big pop-up blinds that are well insulated and can fit multiple people. You can get permanent blinds that are even more expensive, that are, basically like a little miniature shack. You can get tree stands. You can get all this clothing that's like scent proof. You can spend a whole lot of money on bows or on guns, obviously. But if you want to just do the basics, it's not that expensive to get into. Definitely more than fishing, because a deer rifle's not cheap. I don't bow hunt, but I imagine you can get a budget bow for deer hunting significantly cheaper than you can rifle. So depends what kind of hunting you want to do. Now, when I got into it, I basically decided I wanted to hunt, and I had gone the year before and used borrowed equipment. And so then the next year I decided, okay, I'm going to go buy a blind and I'm going to buy a rifle. And so I went to the store, and I had kind of looked a little bit in advance. Didn't really know a whole lot about the different models, the different brands. I bought a Savage 30-06, and I think I spent $350 on it. I don't remember what I paid for ammo. I know that's gone up quite a bit. But it wasn't a huge investment. I mean, if you're gonna deer hunt for the next 20 or 30 years or whatever, a one-time investment of $300 or $400 isn't that much. The pop-up blind I bought, I think I got it for $50. And you can get them quite cheap. And if you're gonna hunt in a tree stand, I know, those are gonna be a little more expensive, but again, depends what you want to do and depends what you want to spend. If you want to just keep it simple, like I did, just get a little ground pop-up blind and a rifle. I said my whole fishing setup from the kayak is less than $500. I think my whole hunting setup is also less than $500. I think besides the rifle itself, the next most expensive thing would be my heater, which actually, of course, I can use ice fishing too. I have the Big Buddy, so it's got 2 ceramic burners instead of 1, and that thing will keep you nice and toasty. But I think one of the biggest downsides for me of hunting is not the money investment, but the time. So if you want to do it right, unless you're on some guided trip on a game ranch or something stupid like that. But if you're hunting public land and you actually want to get a deer, and I'm just talking deer because I haven't gone bird hunting or bear hunting or anything else. I've deer hunted. That's what I've done. And if you want to do it right, you need to be willing to sit out there for long periods of time and really take full advantage of that 2 weeks that you have for rifle season. Now, bow season, you get a whole lot longer. You basically get a month and a half instead of just 2 weeks. But if you're just going to do the firearm season, you got November 15th until November 30th. And daylight hours are limited. Shooting hours are pretty limited. So you gotta be willing to sit out there a lot. I know there were some years where I sat 5 days, maybe 4 or 5 days, like all day, like sun up to sundown in the blind. And that really gets old after a while. Especially opening day or the first day you get to get out. It's wonderful because it's like, okay, you're so excited to get away from all the responsibilities and work and whatever, and just be out in the woods. And so it's great for the first day or maybe even 2. But after that, especially when you're not seeing deer, it gets really long. And it's a hard sport to be into when you have little kids, because unless you have some sort of fancy permanent wooden structure, where you can have your kids come and play with toys or have TV in there or something, or a tablet, it's just not something you can really bring little kids along for. And it takes a lot. It's a big time investment. It's a huge time investment. Now, if you're lucky enough to, have 40 acres of your own land or something, you can hunt out your back door, that's awesome. And I think if that was the case for me, it'd probably be way different. But the place I hunt, just by default, because the people I hunt with, this is where they have been hunting for years, is essentially an hour away, 45 minutes to an hour away. And so it's a big time commitment once you're there, but it's also kind of a big time commitment to get there. And so this past season, I kind of put in a minimal amount of time in the blind. I also was really, really excited to get out and ice fish, so that was part of it too. But that's been a hard one for me to really dive into with both feet, just because of the time investment. It definitely was easier, when we didn't have kids, and I'm sure for a lot of guys that's probably a dilemma too. But the last few years, the time trade-off just hasn't been worth it. So that's kind of how I think about that. Camping's a fun one. Camping is great because you got the whole family, and I like being outside and doing things outdoors and exploring, and it's all of those things. And pretty much every camping trip I also get to sneak out and do a little bit of fishing too. So win, I don't know. It's great. We started out with a tent when it was just 2 of us. And then, we went a few times. We explored, especially after moving back to the UP, explored some different campgrounds. Then after that, my in-laws bought a camper, like a trailer, and like a 27-foot And so we started staying with them when they would go camping. And that kind of went on for a season or two. And then we had the one kid, and bringing a baby camping is can be tricky. That's probably another good thing for if I do an episode on like getting your kids outside and like involving them in outdoor activities. Definitely need to focus on like taking a baby camping. Our older daughter, her first camping trip was actually in a tent, and it was like I think it was maybe the first week of June or last week of May, but it was pretty warm outside. But at night, I think the lows dipped down into the high 30s, and so she was like 6 weeks old at the time, and I know we really pulled out all the stops to make sure she stayed warm, and she stayed plenty warm. But that's a topic for another day. Just thinking about the time and money investment. You can get a tent for really cheap, really cheap. And tenting's great. It just at a certain point, especially with kids, it's just a lot of work and limited space. So 2 falls ago now, we bought a camper, a little used. Thing's 18 years old, but in good shape, clean, everything in working order. And so we bought the thing for like $6,000, and it's been awesome. I love having it. It's a lot less work than I thought it would be. Sometimes if something breaks or something, it's a pain, but the most amount of work is in the fall when you have to winterize it and put the antifreeze in and for the water system. And then in the spring when you kind of do the opposite thing and get it ready for summer and run some bleach water through it. Other than that, which that whole process maybe takes, 3 hours. Relatively easy and easy to set up. And I know for sure if you have the money to buy like a new trailer, you can get any size your heart desires. If you want a little 2-person thing that you can pull into these remote rustic campgrounds, you can do that. If you want a 40-foot fifth wheel, you can do that. Ours is a little 25-foot, just hooks up to my truck, just like standard 2-inch ball. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's got a special hitch that goes in. And then it's got these chains that you kind of torque, and it kind of distributes the weight a little more evenly. Really easy to pull. And the one downside is if you're traveling a long distance, it really, really makes your gas mileage suck. Unless you are driving a diesel truck. I know driving it with my, I have an F-150 with the EcoBoost V6, and it gets around 8-9 miles a gallon when towing the thing. But, it's worth it. It's worth it to have your own space and have more space and to have a solid roof over your head if there's going to be nasty weather. I know there's a few times we've been out where there's been thunderstorms that roll through or, lots of rain. Really nice to have. And we definitely get our money's worth out of it. We camp a lot. We always do a Memorial Day trip, a couple trips during the summer, and then a couple trips during the fall usually too. And so that's been a whole lot of fun to have. Now, as far as a time investment, camping's a big time investment, but if you're going to do it with, other people, especially if you have a family, then it's absolutely, it's a great thing for the whole family because like I said, I get to sneak out and do a little bit of fishing when we go. I just love being out at the campground and like cooking stuff on a fire. That's one of the absolute best joys in life, is eating a meal cooked over the fire. It doesn't matter what, it can be hot dogs, and they taste so much better than if I were to fry them in a pan upstairs at home. Um, Absolutely love camping. Something I think we're gonna do for a long time, and kind of a, well, to get a trailer, travel trailer or a fifth wheel or whatever. Yeah, big money investment, big time investment, but for us, it's worth it. You want to camp on a budget? Tents are cheap. Find some of my favorite campgrounds are rustic campgrounds that you really only can do a tent or maybe a really small trailer. So, and like, we did the whole 2 episode thing about going to Craig Lake. That was just a tent. And I don't really think, well, I know you can't do anything else other than a tent at remote places like that. Now that park happens to have some yurts and some cabins you can rent, but as far as bringing your own equipment in, any kind of backcountry thing, and there's actually some really cool hammock setups you can get too, where if you don't even need a tent, you can just do a hammock with a bug net. A lot of them have the bug net built in. The one I have actually is like that, and I have slept in it a couple times. Or some of them have like a second layer you can do over the top in case it rains. So there's a lot of options. I love camping. It's great. You should try it sometime. I want to end by talking about some things that I probably would do if time and money were expendable. And so the big one for me personally is snowmobiling. And so I grew up doing this a lot. Like an every weekend of the winter, sometimes during the week. And I loved it. And I it's one of those things that I still would do and would love to do. But it just is not a very budget-friendly sport in time or money. And unlike camping, you can't really involve like really little kids. You certainly can take your kids snowmobiling. I know, my parents took me when I was quite small, but it's just, it's not cheap to get into either. I don't know if it ever has been. I think, I don't know, I could be wrong on this, but I feel like just in conversations I've had, with my dad or with other people we've done this with, I think it probably was easier to start out and afford, 20, 25 years ago than it is now. Snowmobiles now are very expensive. If you're going to find a local dealer and look to buy one, they might not even have one in stock, first of all. But they aren't cheap. They're the price of a good used car. A lot of them are approaching the $20,000 mark. And pretty much every snowmobile on the market now, very, very high performance, very fast, very high tech. I mean, pretty much everything comes with heated seats now, for sure heated handlebars. That's been a thing for many, many, many years. I think a lot of the new ones have other different electronic things on the gauges. I don't know if any of them have like built-in GPS yet or not. That'd be cool if they did. But they're not the simple little motor toboggans they were back when they first started becoming popular back in the 60s and 70s. So that's just it's a hard sport to get into unless you already have friends and family who do it. And so I was lucky enough to have friends and family who did it, and so kind of just grew up doing it. And it's an amazing way to see the wilderness and the, I'm going to obviously talk about the UP because that's where I grew up and that's where I live, but the UP, you can travel from end to end, east to west, literally, Sault Ste. Marie to Ironwood, or if you want to be even more specific, like Drummond Island to Ironwood, by snowmobile. You can travel from north to south by snowmobile. Now, I don't know if you can actually ride right into the town of Menominee, but you can certainly get close if they have the snow for it, and go right on up to Copper Harbor and everywhere in between. So it's really an amazing way to see the area and places that you can't get to easily during the summer. And one of my favorite things we did was, we call them a saddlebag trip. So instead of putting them on a trailer and taking them somewhere and then riding for a couple days and then putting back on the trailer and driving home, there were a handful of times where we would do a trip where we literally would leave out our driveway, ride to the trail, which wasn't that far from where I grew up, and then go somewhere. Pack everything. There's different storage bags you can get that attach to the snowmobile. A lot of them have a little compartment already built into the seat, like a trunk, if you will. Of course, you can wear a backpack and that sort of thing. Take everything you need with you, and we'd go, and we'd, stay in one city. We'd stay in one location one night at a hotel, and, eat at whatever the local restaurant was and kind of hang out, and then we'd ride and see some more places the next day and go to a new place. And that's just an incredible way to see the UP. Some really absolutely gorgeous country that I got to see pretty early on, because of that. Places like the Porcupine Mountains and the whole Upper Peninsula, and a lot of national forest land. I think before I really appreciated forests and public land that much, one of my favorite rides is from Munising up to Grand Marais along the whole Pictured Rocks area, and that's become a very, very busy tourist heavy place in the summer and the winter, but still a gorgeous ride. You get to ride up along Lake Superior and past the dunes and stuff. The whole eastern UP has some really amazing riding. We went to Tequamanon Falls multiple times, down to the Mackinac Bridge in St. Ignace. Really amazing way to get out in the winter and explore, but just not budget friendly really in any way. And so after moving back to the UP, one of the first things I wanted to buy was a snowmobile, because that's what I grew up doing and I loved it, and I hadn't really done it that much while I had been in grad school, and when we came back I wanted to do it. And so I found a used machine, and I actually had just started my first teaching job, and my dad and one of my friends actually went out and looked at it and bought the thing on my behalf. And I had that then for a few years, and it was already, when I bought it, it was 10 years old at the time. It was an Articat Crossfire 6, if you're interested. And I had a whole lot of fun on that machine. And the last few years where I really did a lot of snowmobiling, we started, when I say we, I mean me and a couple of my friends who rode as well, started getting a lot more into the backcountry side of snowmobiling, so exploring off trail. That's one of the great things, is there's so much public land that if you want to get off the beaten path, literally, You can do that if you have a snowmobile that is capable of going through deep snow and, navigating these areas in the winter. And so we did that kind of riding, and it was an absolute blast. One of my favorite areas we would ride was up north of Seney, and they just get a whole lot of snow, and there's these big rolling hills and wide open fields that you can kind of play around in the powder, and that was a whole lot of fun. So something that, who knows, maybe years in the future, or maybe even not that long into the future, I don't know, I would absolutely start doing that again. It also would be nice to have one for ice fishing. Although I think that budget versus a budget for actually buying one to ride on the trails and go off trail with and stuff would be quite a bit different. But something that if you're single, or if you don't have kids, or if you do and you want to involve the whole family and invest that kind of money, just like, I talked about camping being a big investment, but we're all in on it. It's great and highly recommend it, but just not really that easy to get into if you don't already have friends and family that do it. One other thing that I want to say about that is there's kind of a dark side to the culture of snowmobiling as well. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people you'll find that will come up to the UP, and this would be true, northern Wisconsin, I'm sure northern Minnesota, upstate New York. I know different states have different laws on this sort of thing. Michigan's snowmobiling, most trails don't have a speed limit. So you, as the operator, have to be cognizant of how fast is appropriate for conditions. The other thing is it's not practical to have a fleet of conservation officers or police officers patrolling the trails, breathalyzing people. I know they probably do that sometimes. But one of the popular things people like to do when they come up here to ride is bar hop. And, ride a ways and stop at one establishment and have a drink or two, and ride another however long and stop at the next place. And that's just not safe. And it's funny because I think it's one of those things that people do, and it's just kind of like an unspoken part of the culture. Like, I think if you were to ask these same people, is it okay to drink and drive? They would probably say, oh, no, of course, whatever. But a lot of those people would probably do this anyway. And so, regardless of if you drink alcohol or not, it's generally a safe idea to save that for after you play, whether that's fishing, definitely hunting, but snowmobiling for sure. Because again, these modern snowmobiles, when I say modern, I mean pretty much anything made after like the year 2000. Although some of the old 90s 3-cylinder triples were pretty fast. But modern snowmobiles are very high powered, they're very lightweight, they're very agile. And if you are intoxicated or not a super experienced driver, or even if you are an experienced rider and you've had a little too much to drink, you're putting yourself in a really dangerous situation. And pretty much every week you'll read another headline in the local news about a snowmobile accident, and they're not all alcohol related. Some of them are speed related. Missing a corner and hitting a tree, or hitting another sled, God forbid. That's horrible, but it happens because people don't always stay on the right side like they're supposed to. But I guess that's one of the aspects of that culture that I don't like. And that culture definitely exists in ice fishing and in other things as well. But I think it's even more dangerous when you're on a motorized thing, you know, capable of doing 80 to 100 miles per hour easily. And, riding through, especially, there's a lot of twisty, narrow trail, sometimes corners where everyone is turning the same direction, get icy, especially if the snow conditions are thin. Sometimes there's random bumps in the trails. Sometimes, I know this year, a lot of the trail clubs, especially out in the eastern UP, have had a problem with the swampy areas freezing solid. So there'll be these big water holes in the middle of the trail that you have to either go through very slowly and carefully or find a way around. And if you're just flying and not paying attention, that can be really, really dangerous really fast. Along with that, some other things that might be kind of fun, probably would be fun, that I probably would do, but just big time and money investment are basically anything else with a motor. So a boat, owning a boat would be fun. Sometimes I talk about it would be fun to have one for like tubing and water skiing and that sort of stuff. But again, a big money investment, big time investment. Side-by-sides have really exploded in popularity. Of course, regular four-wheelers and ATVs have always been pretty popular up here. But side-by-sides have become a huge thing. And you can certainly get one that seats 4 or even more. I've seen 6-seaters. Take the whole family with. Very expensive. Pretty big time investment. And in my limited experience with them, they are it's pretty dusty and pretty loud unless you have one that's like enclosed fully. But basically any motorized thing is just not cheap. So unless you happen to be growing up, and you have family and friends who have these things and you just kind of are already part of that culture, that's great. But if you're starting out fresh, fishing and snowshoeing are definitely cheap and easy to do. So that's kind of a lot, but that's sort of how I've thought about the different things I like to do and budgeting time, budgeting money, and getting the most out of it. So it's going to depend what you're interested in. You might not want to spend hours on the ice or on the water like I do chasing trout. But find something outside that'll get you to explore and see new places. And one of the big things is just notice the beauty around you. And I've said it before, but how fortunate we are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to have so many forest and water resources and all the things that go with that. Camping, hiking, fishing, boating, all of these things I listed here. And more I didn't list. So find a way to get outside even in the wintertime, even when it's cold. Your body will thank you. Your mental health will thank you. And you might just find yourself enjoying something you didn't expect. So I guess I'll wrap it up there. I'm going to go ice fishing tomorrow, and I hope I can catch something, and I'll try to take some clips, post them online. Thanks for tuning in to Saturday Sauna Night. I'm Steve. Talk to you again soon.